Thank you. I would first like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to come here to speak. And it's a wonderful opportunity to actually be able to speak to the public, because I'm actually not used to that. I'm used to talking to professionals and scientists, so this was a bit of a challenge for me, trying to, what are the key concepts that I want you guys to be able to walk out here today. So the title of my talk is How to Make Your Cells Act Young on the Molecular Level. Pretty a celly, title. But I'm going to be talking about, what's happening inside our cells and our tissues as we go through our lives and how we choose to live our life. So basically, for healthy aging, you need to eat healthy and you need to exercise regularly. These are no new news, because we've known this for a really, really long time. Actually, the first medical school that was established in Knidos, Greece in 700 BC actually emphasized preventative medicine, proper diet, healthy living, and cleanliness. This was even before we knew what cells were or bacteria. And this was even before the time of Hippocrates. He wasn't up until 400 BC. So today we know a lot more, but we're still trying to really understand what's happening to our cells as they decay and how and if we can prevent it. But one thing is certain, and that is that metabolism is involved. But it seems like the public don't really know much about metabolism, even just basic metabolism. This is a picture that you generally see. This is the first picture in a biochemistry textbook, and it describes basic metabolic reactions in your body and how they interconnect. Today, I'm going to take this and simplify this so much that you are going to be able to walk out of here and talk biochemistry to your kids or, something like that. Because metabolism really does play a role in healthy aging. One thing that people often are surprised is that when I tell them this, I ask them maybe, when you lose weight, where do you think the fat goes? And people don't know that. They think, maybe we pee it out, or, we don't know. So let's say that you would lose 10 kilograms of fat. Actually, 8.4 kilograms of that are exhaled through the lungs as CO2. And the rest, 1.6 kilograms, become water. That goes as urine, feces, sweat, breath, tears, and other bodily fluids. Now, most of us know that we breathe in oxygen and we breathe out carbon dioxide. And most public even know the chemical formula for these. So oxygen in, O2, and CO2 out. But not many people wonder about, where this extra C is coming from. And I'm going to tell you about that. Okay, so first we need to make a simple analogy. So this is a bonfire, and we have fuel, which is wood here, and we need oxygen to keep the fire going. This is a similar reaction to what's going inside our cells as we burn fuel, except we use carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. So as the fire goes on, you need to add some more wood on it to keep the fire going, but if you pile too much on it, you're going to suffocate the fire. And I'm going to touch on this a little bit and make a comparison to what's happening inside our cells and inside a certain cellular organ called the mitochondria. But to start with the beginning, just with digestion. So we have a meal, we eat it, we chew it, and in the salivary glands, in the saliva, we have amylase that already starts digesting complex carbohydrates. In the stomach, which is acidic environment, it has a role in killing bacteria in the food that we eat, also turn on some enzymes that are important for digestion, and also helps break up the food. When the food travels then to the small intestine, and this is where digestion is completed, and complex carbohydrates are broken into small sugar molecules that can be taken up in the bloodstream, proteins are digested to small peptides or amino acids and taken up. And then we have the bloodstream moving the nutrients to our tissues and to our cells. So we have water on the arterial end of the capillary. We have water, glucose, amino acids, fatty acids, and oxygen delivered to the cells in the tissue. And as they utilize these, they need to turn back some of the water, the waste, and carbon dioxide. And this is what we breathe out then eventually. And to tell you about mitochondria, first I need to dig a little deeper. This is an arbitrary picture of a cell with a cell membrane, nucleus. This is where you store your genetic material that you get from your mom and your dad. And these orange things, these little guys, these are mitochondria. And this is where the burn happens inside your body and inside your cells. So I want to talk to you about mitochondria because it turns out that they really do play a central role in aging. When you look at a mitochondria in a young person, you see plenty of them, and they are healthy looking and vigorous, are able to properly, switch between fuels, glucose, and fatty acids. When you look at a mitochondria in an older person or a person with type 2 diabetes or glucose intolerance, you see that there are fewer mitochondria, they don't look as good, and sometimes they can be a little bit confused. Confused in that they don't know exactly what fuel they should be utilizing. Okay, so dig even deeper. This is inside the mitochondria. It's a very simple schematic. So we have here the fuel, which are either fatty acids or glucose. You would like to be using either one. You don't want to be shoving everything in at the same time. So you have fatty acids and glucose going into the mitochondria. In a muscle cell, you would also have branched chain amino acids coming in as a fuel. And what we see in the mitochondria is that they all converge in this one molecule called acetyl-CoA. Now, this is the most complex slide I'm going to show you today, so bear with me. This acetyl-CoA is fed into the citric acid cycle, which generates CO2, and this is the CO2 that we breathe out. It travels outside of the mitochondria into the bloodstream, then lungs and out. And we also make, in the citric acid cycle, we make these reducing equivalents that are fed into the respiratory chain. This is where the oxygen comes in that we breathe in. And in this reaction, we make these high energy molecules that are important to drive all cellular reactions and to actually be able to move your body. So if we take the fire analogy here, the bonfire, we have fuel coming in, oxygen coming in, CO2 coming out, and energy. So I've touched upon a little bit that we need to be able to, these mitochondria need to be able to choose what fuel they are utilizing, and it depends on environmental cues. For example, in a healthy person, or a young person that has a meal that has carbohydrates in it, insulin goes up in the body. That prompts the cells or the tissues that are insulin responsive to start metabolizing glucose and take up glucose. So as you eat, your body is mostly utilizing carbohydrates. Some time goes by and you're in the fasted state, and then you're mostly utilizing fatty acids. And this is called being metabolically flexible, because your body understands what the environment is telling it. So if you're fed, you want to be utilizing glucose. If you're fasting, you want to be using your energy reserves. You want to be using your fatty acids. What we see in people that have the metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, we see that their mitochondria are confused. It doesn't matter if they've just eaten or they're fasting, they're always using a mix of carbohydrates and fats. And as soon as we see an improvement in the disease and people change their lifestyle and are able to, go back into a more healthy glucose tolerant state, they become metabolic flexible again. So you can reverse this. But this is one of the hallmarks of type 2 diabetes when you're looking at metabolic phenotype of these people. So what could be causing this? One thing is that mitochondria are really good at burning fuel. But when you have a nutrient overload and a sedentary lifestyle, you're shoving in both glucose, fatty acids, and amino acids. And this is going into the mitochondria. And remember, I talked about this molecule here called acetyl-CoA. This is where all of the macronutrients converge into this molecule. And this creates energy. However, if you don't do any work and you don't use that energy, you actually get a buildup of this nutrient intermediate, and it needs to go somewhere. So it starts sticking to the proteins that are doing the work inside your mitochondria. So basically, this is like having a power plant, because mitochondria is basically a power plant. And you have workers that have been working there for 20 years. They know their job. And all of a sudden, you just give them a 20-pound dumbbell, and you say, okay, do your work as well as you've done before. And it's, doesn't work really like that. And it's actually not just this intermediate that gets stuck on the proteins. It's other acyl groups also. But that's, I think it's good to just focus on, one thing at a time here. So we see that on these proteins, we can have multiple acetyl groups, and also other nutrient intermediates can also stick to it. So this leads to, when we see this hyperacetylation in mitochondria, we see declined mitochondrial function, decreased metabolic flexibility, increased systemic inflammation, and increased insulin resistance. Okay, so now that I've scared you enough, I'm going to tell you that this is reversible. If you've had a period of time where your lifestyle hasn't been optimal, and you've been able to, shove a whole thing, of nutrients inside your mitochondria, and it's stuck there, you can actually change your diet to limit the influx of these nutrients into your mitochondria. You can also do some work, physical activity, to help utilize these nutrients so they don't get stuck in there. And then for people with type 2 diabetes, it's often useful to add some L-carnitine for a little bit of time in their life, because it turns out that these people are sometimes deficient in carnitine because they've been working overtime trying to remove these nutrients. But I want to mention that we do make carnitine in our bodies, so healthy people, they don't generally need any extra L-carnitine in their diet. So when we see, when people go through, adding proper diet, exercise, and L-carnitine, we see this both in animal models and in humans, that we see increased glucose tolerance, increased glucose oxidation, metabolic flexibility goes up, and also systematic inflammation. But exercise does more things, more cool things, just impacting the chemical reactions that are going inside, or the metabolic reactions going inside the mitochondria. Exercise training also adds more mitochondria. This is called mitochondrial biogenesis. And remember when I was talking about the difference between younger person and old person? Young persons have more mitochondria. So basically, by adding more mitochondria, by doing exercise training, you're actually able to make your cells act a little younger. And one other also cool function is that exercise training also improves a process called the fusion and fission of mitochondria. And this is where the mitochondria, they can actually fuse together, and then they'll take all the damaged molecules that they can find and shove it into one compartment, and then they kill it. So this is called mitophagy. And this is a really important factor, And this is actually, in this process, you are removing the damaged mitochondria. So when you exercise, you're actually adding healthy mitochondria and removing damaged mitochondria. And this results in enhanced metabolic function and performance. Okay, next I want to tell you, I want to bring an important message to you, which I think a lot of people, they don't think about this when they see all these crazy, fad diets. And that is that the body obeys the law of physics. And this is a very simple equation, and I want you guys to remember this. So, in the first law of thermodynamics, it says that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be moved from one system to another. In our case, we have food energy, and we can utilize this food energy to create or to do some work. And this is, performed by our super mitochondria. We can also use it to heat our body because we're warm-blooded mammals. And this is also what mitochondria do. They heat up our cells and heat up our body. Many people don't know that mitochondria actually stay at 6 to 10 degrees hotter than body temperature, which I think is pretty cool. And what you don't use of the energy to do some work or to warm up your body, you store it as fat. And this is really important because you wanna store your energy in the fat tissue. The fat tissue is really well adapted at storing large amounts of lipids. Because people think about that, when you have high BMI, you must be unhealthy, and that's not true at all. Some people are obese, overweight, but they're perfectly metabolically healthy. And other people are skinny and not metabolically healthy and can have type 2 diabetes. So it's not really a problem with weight per se. It's a problem with metabolism and where you store your energy. I'm gonna have two examples here to prove my point. First, here we have a man that has a really rare disease called lipodystrophy. This is a disease where you have a defect in your adipose tissue and you're not capable of storing the lipids in the right tissue. So the lipids start accumulating in the wrong cells of the body. So these people are thin, but they are really insulin resistant because they store the lipids in the wrong place. And this can result in lipotoxicity, and that leads to insulin resistance. The other extreme example are sumo wrestlers. So these guys are fat, but really insulin sensitive and metabolically healthy. But the danger is that as they retire, and if they keep eating and stop exercising completely, they have a big risk of developing type 2 diabetes, glucose intolerance. So this just shows you that the way you live your life, no matter what weight you're in, it can impact your health. Of course, genetics also play a role, but I want to, bring this message to you. So Rangan just talked a little bit about visceral fat, or at least I saw some slides about visceral fat. Because when you look at BMI, the association between BMI and metabolic syndrome is not that excellent, but when you do studies where you can actually do a CT scan of people and look at the amount of fat that's stored inside their abdominal cavity, that's where you actually see a really good correlation with a whole bunch of lifestyle diseases. So basically, you want to be storing your fat under the skin, on your thighs and butt. That's a really good place to store the fat. You don't want to be storing the fat inside around your organs. This is called visceral fat. Because what we see, and we see this clearly, and that is when you have increased levels of visceral adipose tissue, you see increased risk of metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. We sometimes see this change in women that go through menopause. It seems like women are protected, by estrogen before they go through menopause. Before menopause, women tend to store more weight below the waist, so be a pear shape. But as they go through menopause, they start risking gaining more weight above the waist and in the visceral fat. So they become more like the men, and at this point, their increase of heart attack and other diseases increases. But women going through menopause need to worry about more things than just visceral fat. They actually need to worry about their bones. Because at menopause, rapid bone loss can occur, and even in the first 2 years, they can lose up to 5% of their bone mass. And we see that exercise is the best medicine to prevent bone loss. And of course, make sure that you have plenty of vitamin D and calcium in your diet, especially here in Iceland where we don't have a lot of sun. And I'm going to talk I'm going to finish my lecture by talking about bones, because I feel like people really don't realize how cool bones are. People just think of it as just some concrete, but it's a live tissue and it responds to energy that you put on it. And I'm going to talk about how exercise impacts bone and also how disuse impacts bone. So the first example is, this is a rat experiment where you have axial loading applied on the ulna, and it's going to be on the right ulna on these rats that you have the pressure applied. And the pressure applied for 3 minutes a day, 3 days a week for 16 weeks. And then at the end of the study, they look at and compare the left, which was non-loaded, and the right, which was loaded. This is a cross-section of the ulna, and you see that the green is after and the red is before. We don't really see any difference here. But when you see the right one, you see red is before and green is after. And you can see that where the pressure and the direction of the pressure controls where new bone was laid down. So here we had some tension, and here we had compression forces. And these are the places where you had added bone mineral content. But what is even more amazing is that the bone mineral content only increased by 7%. But strength and fracture energy increased by 64 and 94%. So it's not just the added bone mass, it's also that the tissue has been remodeled to actually be able to better adapt it to to control the direction of the force. So your skeleton reacts to all forces that are applied to it. And then for the other extreme, if you don't use it, you lose it. So this is a control animal. This is an experiment that was done. This is in canines. So this is the canine metacarpal bone. And this is in control animal. And this is after 40-week disuse. So this is pretty advanced bone resorption that's happening here in 40 weeks. This is an adult animal that has stopped growing. So it doesn't have the growth-promoting pathways that you see in young animals as they're growing. So what is causing this? Why are bones so active? Did you know that foamy bones, they actually, in your skeleton, you have a completely new foamy bone in 2 years. And for compact bones, every 10 years, you have a completely new skeleton. And this is because of majorly 2 cells that reside in bones. We have osteoclasts, which eat bone, and then we have osteoblasts, which create new bone. And these guys need to talk to each other. So when you apply force, like exercise, you are actually activating the osteoblast to lay down new bone. And they are smart. They know which direction the force was coming from, so they know where to lay down new bone. And if you get some microfractures, you also want to activate the osteoclast because they are going to eat the damaged tissue and tell the osteoblast to come over and lay down new bone. So this is actually what, athletes do. If I'm going to, because I like extremes, like Muay Thai athletes. So these are like fighting athletes. They need to have really strong shins. So they actually kick things. So they just, constantly, I've seen this, it's terrible. I just hurt watching it. But they just kick iron with their shins. And they create microfractures, which activates these osteoclasts, which eat the damaged tissue. And the osteoblasts are so active when this happens that they're going to create such strong bone that it's just really difficult to even break it. So, do I have time? How am I going on time? Okay, so maybe I'm going to talk a little bit about osteoporosis. So, there are no really good medications for osteoporosis. I'm talking about pills, not exercise. I think exercise is the best medication. The most popular medication for osteoporosis are bisphosphonates. And this is a chemical that sits on your bones, and then as the osteoclasts eat it, they die. So this is to actually limit the resorption of the bone. But it turns out that this might not be really good because the osteoclasts and the osteoblasts, they are actually friends. So they talk to each other a lot. And if you kill the osteoblasts don't get the message about what kind of bone they should lay down. And if people have been on bisphosphonates for too long, they actually get brittle bones. So their bone density might be okay, but the architecture of the bone makes it so that they're really fragile. So we need to find some new medications for osteoporosis, or just make everyone exercise. So this is, I have 2 slides left. So exercise is key to main health as we age, because not only has it impact on your metabolism, it basically keeps your tissues alive and present. Lowers inflammation, strengthens connective tissues, and this is not just for bones, it's also for tendons and cartilage. Prevents age-related muscle atrophy, lowers risk of chronic diseases, and improves mental health. So the take-home message would be, think really how amazing your body is at healing itself when you give it the opportunity to do so. And remember that you are responsible for your own health. Thank you.